Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. What would you do if a neighborhood association you never joined slapped a $15,000 lien on your house? That's the nightmare I woke up to when my new fence offended the local HOA president. She thought she had the power to foreclose on my home, but she didn't realize my property was a legal donut hole she couldn't touch. I bought my house about 6 years ago. It's a modest ranch-style place built in 1953, sitting on just under an acre of land. When I was house hunting, my real estate agent mentioned something interesting about the property. She said it was like an island surrounded by a newer development that went up in the late 90s. The neighborhood around me had formed an HOA back then, but my lot predated everything by about 40 years. I'm the kind of person who keeps records. Not in an obsessive way, just careful. I work as a municipal records clerk, so documentation is kind of my thing. When I bought the house, I made sure to get copies of everything related to the property. The original deed from 1953, the survey maps, the title insurance, the county tax records. I keep them all in a fireproof safe in my office closet because that's just how I operate. For the first 5 years of living here, there were no issues. My neighbors in the HOA-controlled area seemed nice enough. We'd wave at each other, make small talk about the weather or lawn care. I knew there was an HOA managing things around me, but it never came up. I wasn't part of it, so I figured it wasn't my concern. Then I decided to replace my fence. The old chain-link fence that came with the property was falling apart. Rust, bent posts, the whole thing sagging in places. I wanted something that looked better and would actually provide some privacy. After researching options, I settled on a 6-foot black horizontal slat fence. Modern, clean lines, good quality materials. I hired a professional company, got the proper building permits from the county, and made sure everything was done by the book. The installation took about a week. The crew was professional and did excellent work. The fence looked fantastic when they finished. It completely transformed the backyard and added real value to the property. I was happy with my investment. That happiness lasted exactly 3 days. I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find a bright orange paper taped to my new fence. My first thought was that maybe it was some kind of advertisement, but when I got closer I saw it was labeled as a formal violation notice in bold letters at the top. The document informed me that I had installed an unauthorized structure in violation of community standards. According to this notice, all fences in the area were required to be eggshell white vinyl picket style, not exceeding 48 inches in height. My fence violated multiple provisions. The penalty was $500 per day until the fence was removed or brought into compliance. At the bottom was a signature. The HOA president, a woman who lived 3 houses down from me. I stood there reading this thing twice, then a third time. The absurdity of it was almost impressive. I had never signed anything agreeing to HOA rules. I had never attended an HOA meeting. I had never paid HOA dues. Yet here was someone claiming authority over my property and threatening me with daily fines that would add up to over $15,000 a month. My first instinct was to walk down there right then and have a conversation, but I stopped myself. Getting emotional wouldn't help. Instead, I went inside, scanned the violation notice, and started a file folder on my computer labeled HOA issue. Then I pulled out my property documents and reviewed them carefully. Everything confirmed what I already knew. My deed made no mention of any HOA. The legal description of my property showed clear boundaries that had been established in 1953. There were no covenants, conditions, or restrictions attached to my title. The county tax map showed my parcel as a completely separate entity from the surrounding development. I had documentation proving I wasn't part of this HOA, but I wanted to handle this the right way. The next day was Friday. I decided to wait until the weekend and then go talk to the HOA president in person. Saturday morning, I walked down to her house around 10. It was a nice place, bigger than mine, with the mandated white vinyl fence enclosing her backyard. I could hear voices coming from behind the house, so I walked around to the back gate and knocked. She answered, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption. Behind her, I could see 3 other women sitting at a patio table with coffee and pastries. I introduced myself and explained that I had received a violation notice. I kept my tone polite and friendly. I told her there must have been some kind of mistake because my property wasn't actually part of the HOA. Her response was dismissive. She said that all homes in this area were under the association's oversight and that I needed to comply with the rules like everyone else. When I mentioned that my house predated the HOA by several decades, she waved her hand like I was being ridiculous. One of the other women at the table chimed in, saying something about how it didn't matter when my house was built. If I lived in the neighborhood, I was subject to the same standards as everyone else. It was about property values and community appearance. I asked if I could show them my deed and property survey. The HOA president said she didn't need to see my paperwork and that she had been managing this community for 8 years. She knew which properties were included. Then she suggested I stop being difficult and just paint my fence white or replace it with approved materials. The whole interaction had this bizarre quality where they were absolutely certain of their authority and completely uninterested in any evidence to the contrary. I realized pretty quickly that showing them documents wasn't going to accomplish anything. I thanked them for their time and left. As I walked back to my house, I felt this strange mix of frustration and curiosity. These people genuinely believed they had power over my property. They were so confident that they were threatening me with significant financial penalties. I wondered how far they would actually take this. The answer came Monday morning when another notice appeared on my fence. Day 4 of violations. $2,000 in fines now. This one mentioned that if the issue wasn't resolved within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. I photographed the notice and added it to my file. Then I did what I probably should have done immediately and called a real estate attorney whose office was downtown. The consultation was brief. I explained the situation and emailed him copies of all my property documents. He reviewed everything and confirmed what I already knew. I was not part of the HOA. My property had never been subjected to any deed restrictions. The HOA had no authority over my land whatsoever. He said I had a few options. I could ignore them completely since they had no legal standing. I could send them a cease and desist letter. Or I could wait and see if they actually followed through with their threats, at which point we could pursue legal action against them for harassment and potentially slander of title if they filed a false lien. The third option interested me. I asked him to explain slander of title, and he said it was a legal claim that arose when someone made false statements about property ownership or placed improper encumbrances on a title. If the HOA filed a lien against my property knowing they had no legal right to do so, it could be considered slander of title, which carried serious consequences. I decided to document everything and see what happened next. The attorney said he would draft some letters I could send when the time was right. But for now, just keep records of all interactions. The notices kept coming. Every few days, another orange paper taped to my fence. Day 7, Day 10, Day 14. Each one calculated the accumulating fines and repeated the threat about the lien. I started keeping them in a 3-ring binder with plastic sheet protectors, organized chronologically. Every notice was photographed in place before I removed it, with timestamps showing when I found it. I also started a detailed log. Date and time of each notice, exact wording of the violation claimed, the running total of fines, any variations in how they delivered the notice. It was tedious work, but I knew documentation would matter if this went to court. Around the 3rd week, I noticed something interesting. The violation notices weren't consistent. Some cited Section 4.2 of the HOA rules about fence materials. Others referenced Section 6.7 about structure heights. A few mentioned Section 3.1 regarding architectural modifications. It was like they were throwing different rule numbers at me, hoping something would stick. I made note of these discrepancies. Then things escalated. Around 6 in the morning on a weekday, I heard someone in my yard. I looked out the window and saw a guy with a clipboard taking photographs of my fence from multiple angles. He was clearly on my property, walking around the perimeter of the fence to get different shots. He wore a polo shirt with a company logo and khaki pants, very official looking. I grabbed my phone and started recording video from the window. He spent about 10 minutes documenting everything, taking shots of the fence from the street side, then walking right into my yard to photograph it from inside my property line. At one point, he actually put his hand on the fence like he was testing its stability. When he finished, he walked back to his car, which was parked on the street in front of my house. The vehicle had a magnetic sign on the door, identifying him as working for a property management company that apparently did compliance enforcement for HOAs. I immediately backed up the video to my computer and cloud storage. Then I pulled up the property survey and confirmed what I already knew. My fence was positioned exactly where it was supposed to be, which meant the fence posts were about 2 inches inside my property boundary. Anyone walking up to touch the fence or photograph it from that angle was definitely trespassing. This happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always early morning, usually between 6 and 7. Always the same guy with his clipboard and camera. The 4th time, I actually went outside while he was there and asked what he was doing. He seemed surprised to see me. He said he was conducting a compliance inspection for the HOA. I asked him if he realized he was on private property. He looked confused and said he was just documenting the violation. I told him that he needed to stay on the public sidewalk or street for any future documentation and that he was not authorized to be on my land. He muttered something about just doing his job and left. I recorded every incident and noted the dates and times in my log. I also checked my security camera footage. I had a simple camera system that covered my driveway and front yard. Sure enough, it had captured 2 additional early morning visits that I had missed because I was already at work. The guy had been there at least 6 times total. By this point, the situation was starting to affect my daily life. I was waking up early every morning wondering if that compliance guy would show up. I was checking my fence for new notices every time I came home. The stress was building, even though I knew intellectually that I was in the right. The kicker came about 5 weeks after the first violation notice. I received a certified letter informing me that due to my continued non-compliance, the HOA had placed a lien on my property in the amount of $15,500. The letter stated that if the lien wasn't satisfied within 60 days, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings. This was the line they shouldn't have crossed. A lien on a property is serious. It shows up on title reports. It can affect your credit. It can complicate any attempt to refinance or sell. And in this case, it was completely fraudulent. I called my attorney and told him what happened. He said this was actually good news in a strange way because they had now committed a clear legal wrong that we could take action against. He drafted 2 letters for me to send via certified mail. The first was a debt validation request. Under fair debt collection laws, if someone claims you owe them money, you have the right to demand proof of the debt. I asked them to provide 3 specific things. 1, a copy of any signed agreement showing that I had joined the HOA or agreed to be bound by their rules. 2, a property survey or plot map showing my lot was within the HOA boundaries. 3, an itemized breakdown of how they calculated the $15,500 they claimed I owed. The second letter was a notice of non-jurisdiction. It formally informed them that my property predated their HOA, was never legally subjected to their covenants, and that they had no authority to levy fines or place liens against my title. I attached copies of my deed, the original property survey from 1953, and the current county tax map clearly showing my parcel as separate from the HOA development. I also included a paragraph about their compliance officer. I mentioned that I had video evidence of him trespassing on my property multiple times for the purpose of documenting alleged violations. I pointed out that my fence was actually positioned 2 inches inside my property line, which meant that every time he walked up to photograph it, he was standing on private land without permission. I suggested they instruct him to stop these visits immediately. Both letters went out certified mail with return receipt requested. Now it was a waiting game. About a week later, I got a call from my attorney. He said the HOA's lawyer had contacted him. Apparently, after receiving my letters, someone had actually bothered to check the property records and they realized they had a problem. The HOA's attorney wanted to know what it would take to resolve this situation quietly. My attorney's response was simple. Remove the lien immediately. Issue a written acknowledgement that my property is not part of the HOA. Reimburse me for the legal fees I had incurred so far, and stop sending violation notices. There was some back and forth over the next few days. The HOA's attorney tried to negotiate on the legal fees, suggesting they would split the cost. My attorney held firm. They created this mess, they filed a fraudulent lien, they sent someone to trespass on private property repeatedly. They were going to pay for all of it. Then something interesting happened. I received a notice about a special board meeting being held at the community center. The agenda listed only one item and it was marked as an executive session regarding a property matter. The meeting was open to all HOA members and any affected parties. I wasn't a member, but I was definitely an affected party. I decided to attend. The night of the meeting, I showed up with my laptop and the small portable projector I sometimes used for work presentations. The community center was a decent-sized room with about 30 people there. I recognized a few neighbors. The HOA board sat at a table at the front. They had name placards in front of each seat, very official looking. There was a podium with a microphone for community members who wanted to speak. The president looked surprised and unhappy to see me when I walked in. I took a seat in the third row and set my laptop bag on the chair next to me. A few people glanced over at me, clearly curious about why I was there. The president called the meeting to order and went through some standard opening procedures, roll call of board members, approval of the previous meeting minutes. Then she got to the main agenda item. She tried to say that executive sessions were for members only and that I would need to leave for this portion of the meeting. I stayed seated and calmly pointed out that the meeting notice had specifically listed this as an open meeting regarding a property matter affecting a named party. Since I was that party, I had every right to be present. Another board member, an older guy who seemed less hostile than the president, said I was correct. The notice had gone out to the whole community and hadn't specified a closed session. If they wanted to exclude me, they should have followed different procedures. She reluctantly agreed and continued with the meeting. She started explaining that there had been an ongoing issue with a property owner who was refusing to comply with community standards. She made it sound like I was being deliberately difficult and disrespectful to my neighbors. She said they had attempted to work with me, had sent numerous notices, and had even offered to help me find approved contractors to fix the violation. None of that was true, but she presented it as fact. She went on to describe the fence itself, calling it an eyesore and a deviation from the community aesthetic. She said it was negatively impacting property values for surrounding homes and creating a precedent that could lead to other violations. She made it sound like my fence was some kind of ramshackle disaster instead of the professionally installed improvement it actually was. Then she got to the financial side. She explained that fines had accumulated to over $15,000 due to my continued non-compliance. She said the board had exhausted all other options and now needed to consider foreclosure on the lien to protect the financial interests of the association. I raised my hand. She ignored me for a moment, but the older board member noticed and said I should be allowed to speak since the matter directly concerned me. I asked if I could present some information that might be relevant to the discussion. She looked like she wanted to refuse, but with everyone watching, she couldn't really deny me without looking unreasonable. I stood up and walked to the side of the room where there was an empty table. I set up my laptop and connected the projector, which I aimed at a blank wall where everyone could see. Several board members shifted in their seats. The president asked what I was doing. I said I was about to provide documentation that would clarify the situation. I pulled up the first image on my laptop. It was the original 1953 deed to my property, scanned in high resolution so every word was legible. I explained that the house was built 70 years ago, purchased by the original owners from the builder, and had been continuously occupied since then. I zoomed in on the legal description and highlighted the metes and bounds that define my property. Then I displayed the county tax map. This was the key document. The map showed the entire development around me with all the HOA parcels clearly marked in one color. My parcel was marked in a different color, sitting right in the middle. It literally looked like a donut hole. The visual was impossible to argue with. Several people in the audience leaned forward to get a better look. I walked them through what this meant legally. I explained that when the development company bought the land in the 90s to build the neighborhood, my property was not included in that purchase. It couldn't have been because someone already owned it. The development went up around me and the HOA was formed to manage those properties, but mine was never part of it. Next, I brought up the concept of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I explained that these were legal documents that had to be recorded with the county and attached to property deeds. They created enforceable obligations on property owners. For an HOA to have authority, these documents had to exist and had to specifically name the property in question. I pulled up my deed again and showed that there were no CC and RS attached to it. I also showed the title insurance policy from when I bought the house 6 years ago, which specifically certified that the title was free and clear of any restrictions or encumbrances related to homeowner associations. Then I showed them the HOA's own CC and Rs, which I had obtained from the county records. I turned to the section that listed all the properties subject to the covenants. It included legal descriptions for every lot in the development. My property was not on that list. I had highlighted this fact in yellow on the document. The room had gotten very quiet. A few people were whispering to each other. One woman in the back raised her hand and asked the president if she had known about this. The president said something vague about how property lines were complicated and that just because something wasn't explicitly listed didn't mean it wasn't included. I moved on to address the lien. I pulled up a definition of slander of title from a legal dictionary and read it aloud. It explained that slander of title occurred when someone made false statements about property ownership or placed improper encumbrances on a title, causing harm to the owner. I pointed out that placing a lien on property without legal authority fell squarely within this definition. I also displayed the statute that covered slander of title in our state. It allowed for recovery of actual damages, attorney fees, and in cases of bad faith or gross negligence, punitive damages. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I mentioned that I had already filed a formal notice of harassment with the county clerk and that if the lien wasn't removed immediately, I would be moving forward with a civil lawsuit. I made it clear that the lawsuit wouldn't just name the HOA as an entity, but would also name individual board members who had voted to authorize the lien. Personal liability was a real possibility here. I also brought up their compliance officer trespassing on my property. I played a short video clip showing him clearly on my land taking photographs. I explained that I had dated and time-stamped evidence of multiple incidents and that this constituted criminal trespass. The final thing I mentioned was their insurance. I told them that insurance companies don't like covering HOAs that engage in gross negligence or bad faith actions. Placing a fraudulent lien on someone's property definitely qualified. If their insurer found out about this and dropped them, they would have a very hard time finding another company willing to take them on. That would be a problem for every homeowner in the association because most mortgage companies required HOA insurance as a condition of the loan. The room had gotten very quiet while I talked. When I finished, I asked if there were any questions. The president looked like she wanted to argue, but the other board members were clearly worried. One of them asked the HOA's attorney, who was sitting in the back, if what I said about slander of title was accurate. The attorney stood up and confirmed that yes, if they had placed a lien without proper authority, it could result in liability. He also said he had advised them of this risk in writing after reviewing my documentation, but the decision had been made to proceed with the foreclosure discussion anyway. That got some angry looks directed at the president. Another board member asked her directly why she had pushed forward with this when their own attorney had warned them. She tried to deflect, saying something about how all properties in the area should be held to the same standards, and how my fence was an eyesore that affected everyone's property values. I pointed out that my property value wasn't their concern since I wasn't part of their association, and that my fence was actually a high-quality improvement that increased my home's worth. I also mentioned that several of my neighbors who were in the HOA had complimented the fence and asked where I had gotten it done. The meeting devolved into arguing between board members. Some wanted to remove the lien immediately and apologize. Others felt like backing down would make them look weak. The president kept insisting that they couldn't let me get away with this or it would set a bad precedent. Finally, their attorney stepped in and addressed the board directly. He said that they had 3 options: remove the lien voluntarily and attempt to negotiate a settlement with me, wait for me to file suit and then remove the lien, which would still result in them paying my legal fees and potentially additional damages, or try to proceed with foreclosure, lose badly in court, and face even greater liability including possible sanctions for bringing a frivolous action. He made it clear which option he recommended. One of the board members made a motion to remove the lien immediately and authorize payment of my reasonable legal fees. After some more debate, it passed 4-1. The president was the only no vote. The attorney said he would file the lien release with the county first thing in the morning and would be in touch with my attorney regarding the fees. Then he strongly suggested that someone from the board should apologize to me publicly for the inconvenience and stress this had caused. There was an awkward silence. Finally, the board member who had made the motion stood up and addressed me. He said he was sorry for what had happened and that it should never have gotten to this point. He acknowledged that they should have done their due diligence before sending the first violation notice. He said he hoped this wouldn't damage the good relationships between neighbors in the area. I thanked him for the apology and said I appreciated his willingness to address the situation properly. I also said I had no intention of causing problems for the HOA or its members going forward. I just wanted to be left alone to maintain my property as I saw fit. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that. As people filed out, a few of my neighbors came up to apologize individually. They said they had no idea what was going on and felt bad that it had escalated so far. I told them I understood it wasn't their fault and that there were no hard feelings. The president avoided me completely and left through a side door. True to his word, the HOA's attorney filed the lien release the next day. I checked the county records online and confirmed it was there, properly recorded and removing any cloud from my title. My attorney confirmed receipt of payment for his fees within a week. The check came from the HOA's account and included the full amount we had requested, no attempts to short us or negotiate it down. I also received a formal written statement from the HOA. It was on their official letterhead, signed by the new acting president since the previous one had apparently stepped back temporarily. The statement acknowledged that my property was not part of their association, had never been subject to their covenants or restrictions, and that they had no authority over it. It explicitly revoked all violation notices and fines, and confirmed that the lien had been released. They even included an apology for the inconvenience and stress caused. My attorney reviewed the statement and said it was about as good as we could hope for without going to trial. It provided clear documentation that would prevent any future issues. He suggested I keep copies in multiple locations and make sure my title insurance company had a copy as well. I did exactly that. I scanned the statement, backed it up to 3 different cloud services, printed hard copies for my records, and sent a copy to my title insurance company with a letter explaining what had happened. I wanted a paper trail showing that this matter was completely resolved. The former compliance officer never came back. I continued checking my security camera footage for a few weeks, but there were no more early morning visits. No more orange violation notices appeared on my fence. It was like the whole thing had never happened, except I had the documentation proving it had. But the story doesn't quite end there. About a month later, I was working in my yard one Saturday afternoon when one of my neighbors stopped by. He lived 4 houses down, and we had always been friendly but never particularly close. He walked up to where I was trimming some bushes and started a conversation. He said there had been a special election and the HOA had a new president. Apparently, several residents had been unhappy with how the previous board handled various issues. My situation was the final straw for a lot of people. They felt like the aggressive approach and refusal to admit mistakes reflected poorly on the whole community. He explained that once word got around about what happened at the board meeting, people started asking questions. How could the board not have checked property boundaries before threatening legal action? Why had they ignored their own attorney's warnings? What other decisions were being made without proper due diligence? This led to a broader examination of how the HOA was being run. Apparently, there were other issues people had been frustrated about but never pushed back on. Arbitrary enforcement of rules, playing favorites with certain homeowners, making decisions without proper board votes. My case brought all of that to the surface. I asked what happened to the former president. He said she was still living in the neighborhood but was no longer involved in the HOA at all. After the board meeting, she had resigned from her position. A few other board members had resigned as well, saying they didn't have time to deal with the drama. New elections were held and almost entirely new people were voted in. He also mentioned that the new board had made it a priority to verify all property boundaries and make sure they weren't overstepping their authority with anyone else. They hired a surveyor to create a detailed map of exactly which properties were and weren't part of the HOA. It turned out there were 2 other homes at the edges of the development that were in similar situations to mine, though those owners had just been quietly ignoring HOA notices rather than pushing back. The new board contacted those property owners and apologized, confirming they had no authority over them. They also updated their records and maps to clearly show which properties were actually part of the association. I thought that was a positive development. Apparently, my situation had actually improved things for other residents by forcing the board to be more careful and transparent. Sometimes it takes one person standing up to broken systems to make them work better for everyone. My neighbor thanked me for handling everything the way I did. He said a lot of people appreciated that I hadn't made it into a huge public spectacle or tried to embarrass the neighborhood. I had just quietly documented everything and let the facts speak for themselves. He said it was a good lesson for everyone about the importance of verifying information before taking action. As for my fence, it still stands exactly as I built it. Black, horizontal slats, 6 feet tall, professionally installed. It looks great and provides the privacy I wanted. Sometimes I sit on my back deck in the evening and appreciate how it turned out. There is one addition I made though. About a week after the board meeting, I ordered a small metal sign. Nothing obnoxious or rude, Just a simple brushed aluminum plaque that I mounted on the fence near the front corner facing toward where the former president lives. The sign says, "Not a member, have a great day." The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a while back with a large Australian hospital. The Friday before Christmas, senior management dropped the dreaded restructure notice. Standard spiel about realignment, better patient outcomes, efficient practice, blah blah blah. They give notice to the staff and unions that consultation closes first week of January. The new employment structure will take place in February. Under the conditions of our industrial award, the employer must make genuine consultation available where the employee has the opportunity to change the employer's mind about making them redundant. The other thing is, redundancy payouts are generally good in health in Australia, with a worker with 13 years work history gets a year's pay with $113,000 tax-free plus entitlements such as annual leave and long service leave paid out. Each year you work, your redundancy increases in value to a maximum of 13 years. About 4 to 5%, 200 plus of staff are going to be made redundant. The union launches into the industrial court arguing that the time given, especially over Christmas, is insufficient. The court agrees and extends the time by 2 weeks but issues 2 statements. 1. The industrial court will not slow down this restructure anymore, and 2. It strongly reminds the unions there was multiple, that you can only consult. Hospital management see this as a big win and are bragging how they are going beat us. The unions have a combined meeting and decide that if the staff can only consult, then ask as many questions as we can. The members are asked to field as many questions as possible. My union alone gather 1,200 plus questions, with 700 of them unique, another 800 to 900 questions coming from the other unions. As you can imagine, management does not respond well to our combined 2,000 plus questions. They attempt to push on. We head back to court where we remind the judge of his must consult orders. The court tells our employer that they must answer the questions. The restructure is on hold by court order. What were the questions like? Some questions were about legal ramifications due to industrial award requirements, others about professional legal standards. Some questions about day-to-day operations, and others about how they would be personally impacted. The court orders both sides to meet back in a month, and hospital management must answer all questions. We get our answers in 3 weeks' time that consist of yes, no, maybe, possibly, and unsure answers. All one-word answers. This is not genuine consultation. We head back to court, and the judge is furious about lack of real consultation. The hospital argue it's too many questions to answer, but the judge reminds them they only have to genuinely consult. Come June, we are in a legal holding pattern when hospital management declares that they are changing the restructure on feedback given and issues new restructure papers. The restructure will take place in 4 weeks' time. New restructure requires new consultation, which the hospital isn't willing to do. Back to court, the unions go to remind the judge about genuine consultation. We won again by just consulting. Come December, 1 year after starting all of this, the hospital hires a consultant to get the restructure done. She has the same attitude as hospital management and tries to rush through the restructure without genuine consultation. We head back to court, and at this stage the judge has had enough and notes the unions have played by the rules and the hospital hasn't. We hit back with even more questions, and judge decides he will set down monthly meetings with him, chairing them to work through this mess. In total, the restructure takes over 3 years, with loss of a lot less jobs lost than expected. In fact, it was a fraction of jobs expected to go. In some departments, we gained jobs by arguing about workloads, etc. The vast majority of people who lost their jobs were close to retirement age and received a handsome payout. They also got 3+ years pay, as the restructure took place over that time. Some of the union's members had worked less than the 13 years work history maximum payout before the restructure. The 3+ years of delay increased their payouts. All we did was consult by asking questions as the judge ordered. Anyway, thank you for watching.